It's my great pleasure to introduce today Jack Saunderson. You will know Jack because he is a presenter here on GDR and every now and again my bridge player. Hello, Jack.
Good afternoon, Prudence. Thank you for your invitation to talk with you today. It's always a pleasure to listen to your program, and it's great to be part of it.
Now, the reason I'm speaking with Jack today is because when I researched my presentation tribute to the 80th anniversary of VE Day, Victory in Europe Day, on the 8th of May 2025, I realised there was an enormous amount of information as related by adults, but very little from the children of the time. Today, I'm going in a small way to rectify that by bringing to you someone you know very well. Jack Saunderson was actually a child in 1945. So Jack is going to tell us today about some of his wartime memories as a child.
Well, I'm happy to do that. I took a little while to get my memories sorted. I was nearly 7 years old and in grade 2 at primary school in September 1939, 12 years old and in first year high school in September 1945 when the war ended.
Jack, when I asked if you would accept my invitation for an interview on the subject of childhood wartime memories, you let me know you wanted to give it some thought. Was that because you wanted to recall your memories, or you wanted to get your thoughts in place?
Mostly just to get my memories sorted. As I say, I was 7 years old, but now I'm happy to share those memories, those thoughts and recollections of my childhood days. I'm sure some of your listeners will have similar recollections, and I hope our conversation will stimulate some of them.
A few personal questions to set the scene, but I think you may already have answered this for me. Just repeat, please, what age were you at the start of World War II? And also, would you please let us know where did you live and how many in your immediate family?
Well, as I said, I was in primary school, grade 2, when the war started, so I would have been 7 years old. 7 years old then. Yes, I was 7 years old when Prime Minister Menzies made his melancholy duty speech on the 3rd of September 1939. It was actually my younger sister's 4th birthday. In addition to her, I had a baby brother, so there was Mum, Dad and we 3 kids. We lived on a tiny farmlet in the mid-north of South Australia at a place called Yatna. We milked a few cows, from them we got our milk and cream. My mum made butter from the cream and we sold the excess to a butter factory in the nearby Peterborough. We had chooks and we sold eggs as well as cream. When the chooks finished laying, we killed them for meat and used the feathers for making pillows. Had to strip the feather to make soft pillows. We killed most of our own meat, poultry, lambs and pigs, but not the bigger animals like cattle. We weren't equipped to kill them. Yatna then had a one-teacher primary school, a pub, a general store, which later included a manual telephone exchange, 2 churches and a memorial hall with its 2 adjacent tennis courts. None of these facilities has survived. There were probably a dozen occupied buildings, including the store, pub and school, in an area of maybe 4 square miles where we lived. Nowadays, though, all of those facilities have closed. Most of them have people living in them, but there's no recognised or identifiable village anymore.
Jack, did your parents explain to you what war is, why it's happening, and how things were going to change?
Well, Prudence, there were 2 very different phases to our war. From 1939 to 1941, the war was a long way away, Europe and North Africa. There were Australian air crews, RAAF personnel, fighting in Europe during and after the Battle of Britain, and a little later the Australian Army saw heavy fighting in North Africa. But it was all a long way from Yatna. Some local men were called up for military service. Roped in was the slang language of the time. But in country areas, most were needed to manage farms and support the farmers. But when Germany invaded Russia, my mum insisted that our new dog be called Timoshenko, after the Russian marshal, who Mum said was winning the war for us. Perhaps he helped, I don't know. But not much changed. We kids went to school as usual, and after school we brought in the cows, milked them by hand, separated the cream, fed the animals, collected the eggs, did all of that, just as we has always done. At school our lessons continued as normal, but at recess and lunchtime playtimes, we boys pretended to be RAAF fighter pilots, running around the schoolyards with our arms extended, shooting down innumerable Messerschmitts, Focke-Wulfs and Heinkels, the German aircraft of the day, shooting them down all over the place. We were the great heroes. I remember it all rather fondly as fun. But then, at the very end of 1941, came the Japanese raid on Pearl Harbor, rapid Japanese advances in East and Southeast Asia, and then the terrible military disaster at Singapore. General MacArthur made his "I shall return" speech at the tiny town of Tarawi, which is not very far from Yatna. Our parents and their friends were clearly worried by this time, and we young children, although we didn't comprehend it all, we understood that bad things were happening and that we could become victims of it all. So there was this sense of foreboding and feeling of insecurity. But we were small boys, so we played our war games, now shooting down Zeros, the Japanese warplanes. But it was different. Darwin, Broome and Derby were bombed. Japanese submarines shelled Sydney and Newcastle. A hospital ship, I think it was called the Centaur, was sunk. It was sunk by a Japanese submarine. But as children, we were shielded from it as much as possible. But of course, I realised that bad news meant that bad things could happen.
Were you aware of rationing? Did you ever feel deprived as such? And what was your special treat? Was it going to the cinema or eating ice cream? What was your special treat?
Well, as I said earlier, we small boys ran around being great war heroes. But there were some changes. There were send-offs to young men who volunteered or were roped in, as we said, for military service. At school we had evacuation exercises. There was a school's patriotic fund raising money to support the armed services. All of we bigger kids knitted scarves for our soldiers. The girls cut tails from worn-out shirts and hemmed them to make handkerchiefs. We collect metal for the war effort, including dragging old, disused farming equipment to school to be collected. We also collected animal bones. I don't know what they were used for, what use they were put to. But for the most part, school life and farm life continued, but with an aura of concern, particularly after Pearl Harbor and the huge Japanese successes in East Asia and the islands to our immediate north. Rationing became part of our life. Food, clothing and petrol were rationed. Food rationing didn't affect our family all that much because we produced much of our own food, so our food coupons were only needed for fruit, vegetables and processed foods. And we didn't need much of them, and they were too expensive anyway. Clothes rationing was a bit of a bigger nuisance, overcome mostly by hand-me-downs within the family and between families. It was all a nuisance and occasionally a real problem, but we realised that it was we were far better off than people in Europe, for example, who were directly affected by the war. I can't remember ever feeling particularly deprived by any of this. Our lives had always been pretty simple. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have gas or telephone or radio or running water. Our only fresh water supply was from a tank which collected roof runoff. We didn't have flush toilets, just an outhouse perhaps 20 metres from the main house. There were no showers, we bathed once a week, we used candles and a kerosene lamp for lighting, the wood stove for heating, so wartime restrictions didn't make a huge difference to us. You asked if I felt deprived. The answer's no. Not very much had changed in our childhood lives. All the other kids in the district were in the same boat. We lived our lives pretty much as we had before war broke out, and pretty much as the generation before us had lived their lives. And ice cream, well, we had no way of keeping it cool, and we had no refrigerators, so there was none. But in my last year of primary school, the school teacher's wife got a kerosene refrigerator, and we occasionally had an ice cream at school.
Jack, I've heard tell of backyard bomb shelters, Nissen huts and gas masks. Did these ever cross your path?
No, we weren't issued with gas masks, and we didn't dig ourselves a bomb shelter. There were some people in nearby towns who did dig shelters, but in our little community, none, not even at the school. And I just remember at the school now, I perhaps should have told you this earlier, that Australia, of course, had become an independent country as the Commonwealth of Australia on the 1st of January 1901, following federation of the 6 states, or 6 colonies. But each Tuesday morning, in front of the shelter shed, we marched in line all together and recited, "I love my country, the British Empire," not Australia. "I honour her king, King George VI. I salute her flag, the Union Jack, and I promise to cheerfully obey her laws and customs." And then we sang "God Save the King." No Australian flag and no Australian songs.
Just wondering about the food, and I know that you didn't have the ice cream, but did you have a vegetable garden?
We didn't have a vegetable garden because of lack of water. It's a very dry area up there, just south of the Goiter line. So we only had roof runoff water for the kitchen, laundry, bathing and other needs. Fortunately, we did have a well with a windmill to water our farm animals, our stock, but that water was far too brackish for us to drink, and you couldn't even use it for washing or laundry, too brackish, and the soap wouldn't soap up.
Was your father involved in military service, and if so, how did that affect your family?
Well, no, my dad was not called up for military service. He ran a mail service to the nearest railway station in Yongla 3 times a week, and on one other day he collected eggs and cream from surrounding farms and took them to the butter factory in Peterborough. This was considered an essential service, so no, he wasn't called up.
Jack, I think you have a wonderful, absolutely wonderful memory of your childhood. It didn't seem as though war affected you enormously. But just thinking, Jack, you chose a career in the Air Force. Did the war have any influence on that decision?
Not really, no. In 1963, I was called up for national service in the Army. This was the time of Vietnam, of course. I was working as a clerk at the BHP at a place called Iron Knob, a tiny mining town about 20 kilometres from Whyalla in South Australia. I'd been thinking of joining the Air Force, so the call-up precipitated my action. I joined as a trainee radio technician, and after training I spent 5 years in Woomera. In fact, 3 of my children were born there. I was commissioned in 1961 and completed an engineering degree at RMIT while still in the Air Force in 1965. I left the RAAF in 1966 and just worked in the telecommunications industry after that.
Jack, thank you so very much indeed for sharing your childhood World War II memories with us. Just to finish, is there a particular tune you'd like me to play?
Well, Prudence, one of my favourite songs with the flavour of those times is Lili Marlene. Now, I have heard a recording in which the song is sung twice, once in English and once in German. I found that very moving. If you have it, I'd love to hear it, Prudence.
I'll certainly see what I can do for you, Jack, and if I can't get it in both English and German, we'll have it in either English or German. Jack, thank you so very, very much indeed for sharing those memories with us.
Thank you, Prudence. It's been a pleasure.